Maggie Quinn. I'm a history professor at Queen's University, and I focus on Indigenous studies.
I'm Chad. I'm a clerk from the Ministry of Education.
Greetings all. I'm Thomas McEwitt, historian.
We are interviewing pseudo-historian Thomas McEwitt. McEwitt has spent the majority of his life investigating claims that infamous Canadian Métis leader Louis Riel was the second coming of Christ, and that the sacred Promised Land was not in Jerusalem, but in Manitoba, Canada. Armed with an undergraduate degree in Canadian history from Ryerson University, McEwitt is the leading expert on this myth, refusing to get torn down by other historians who insist his claims are unsubstantiated and inconclusive. McEwitt's theory could change everything we know about our past. This is Canadian Mysteries.
It's really hard, when your entire field of study, you've been belittled and ignored.
Riel and the Métis resistance is a hard field of study because there are so many conflicting opinions about Riel himself.
Louis Riel, a figure in Canadian history whose life and legacy is still so uncertain and hotly contested amongst experts in various fields. Over a century after he lived and died, is there any way for us to know the truth about this mysterious Métis leader and whether he was, in fact, fighting for more than what is documented in these disputed histories? Was Louis Riel trying to secure a spiritual promised land for his people?
Louis Riel's mental state during the uprisings and his trial is greatly contested, so we as the Ministry of Education can neither confirm nor deny claims about his insanity or his definitive intentions of his actions. Instead, we want people to remember how good of a leader he was and how important he would have been to transition the Métis into the Canadian state if his mental and religious afflictions hadn't led to his unfortunate death.
The government wants to push the fact that Riel's mental health was the reason he turned against the Canadian government at the time, because they want us to believe that they would have been a Canadian patriot if he wasn't insane. University professors for decades had been preaching that Riel's was just a rebel and a madman. They refused to consider the possibility that Riel was acting as a hand of the divine. He said himself that he heard the voice of the Virgin Mary. He was a prophet for his people. How do we know that he wasn't? Riel said so himself, in his diaries. See, right here, he said that the Spirit of God spoke to him, told him that there was his duty to lead his people to their promised land and to fight for it. Doesn't that story just sound a little familiar?
Did humanity get the Promised Land wrong this whole time? Rather than in the deserts of the Middle East, was God's Promised Land actually, in fact, in northwest Manitoba?
Riel is like such an important figure for Canada, The political situation of the time was complicated. We want to remember Riel's heroic patriotism when honoring his memory.
Dismissing Riel to nothing more than a patriot completely disregards the fact that the government who wants to now reclaim him as a national hero are actually the ones who back then were responsible for his death.
Christ died fighting for his people, for their sins, to protect their land, to resist the imposition of Roman governments in Israel. Riel died doing the same thing. He said in his own diaries, "The Spirit of God told me, you're right, protect your families, protect them in the things of this world and forever after." The Métis put their faith in Riel to fight for their rights and the land the Canadian government was trying to take from them. Christ was crucified and Riel was hanged for doing the exact same. Coincidence? I think not.
What do you think about claims that Louis Riel was a reincarnation of Christ who was trying to secure a promised land for his people in Manitoba?
The narrative about Riel has kept changing in the last century. Sources about him are unreliable because the expert historians from 30, 40, 50 years ago completely brushed aside Riel's Métis origins. We can't dismiss the fact that Riel was in fact a prophet within the Métis community. Of course that's true, and that's something that historians and national experts have tried to disregard in the histories about Riel out of undeniable racism. They don't want to accept that Riel was part of an indigenous community whose rights were being stripped away. The truth is, whatever Riel's religious beliefs were, they had no influence on his decision to lead a Métis resistance. He did it because his people deserved justice. They deserved their indigenous land and they deserved a place within the new Canadian state. In fighting for this, Riel was doing the right thing for his people.
The court ultimately ruled in favor of Riel's execution. Not that much of a national hero if he was executed by his own government.
Riel always had a lot of faith in the government. He didn't believe that the Métis would be wrong because he, like us, was a good Canadian citizen. He trusted his government. Like I said, there was a lot going on at the time. Disagreements between the East and West, Upper and Lower Canada, Ontario and Quebec, English versus the French, conservative versus liberal. It was a very conflicting time.
These are the histories of Riel that the ministry think are important for the younger generations to know.
Yeah, of course. It's a defining part of Canadian history that we should be proud of.
And the ministry has done research into this for what goes into the curriculum?
We collaborate with a private company that has access to government archives and reports from official government inspectors who reported on the Métis community, yes.
Universities have been offering their research expertise to collaborate with the ministry for the school curriculums for a long time, but we've never been taken up on it. I'd love to see an Indigenous citation in the research, but I'll bet you my whole pension that you won't find one.
Will we ever discover the truth? For now, the mystery of Riel's promised land remains unsolved.